Hello. My name is Hannah. I'm 23, and let's be honest, I've never been an angel. But seducing a gentleman old enough to be my father to save my family heritage, it was too much even for me. But first things first, I grew up helping my father with his coffee shop in our neighborhood, and before I even finished high school, I'd already learned every aspect of that business. Our friends often gathered in that coffee shop. It was our little sanctuary. It's no wonder that after school I went to culinary school to become a high-class chef. Things began to crumble when I was 19. Oh, I remember the actual day vividly. I was sitting inside the coffee shop with my boyfriend Ken. We'd been together for 2 years and got along pretty well. He studied architecture and was showing me his freshly finished paper layouts. Suddenly, the door opened and this annoying, unknown girl came in. I didn't like her at first sight. She demanded a non-dairy oat milk honey latte right away. I asked her to choose something from the menu, but she began to threaten me, saying that she would spoil the rating of our coffee shop on her social media. I went into the kitchen to check what we had in stock, and when I returned, the girl was sitting next to Ken, discussing architecture. So, yeah, this is how we met Pam. She had just moved to town with her filthy rich father, Alex, who was looking for new business opportunities. Since that day, she began to visit the coffee shop on a regular basis. Eventually, we became friends. I introduced Pam to my group of friends and she became a part of it. For her birthday, she invited everyone to her fancy house with a swimming pool and a tennis court. Ken and I attended the party together and we brought a cake that I had made myself. In the middle of the party, I noticed Pam's father in the kitchen. He arrived unexpectedly and had brought some young, sultry blonde in a tight, short dress. Obviously, they were very drunk. I asked Alex if he wanted to try my cake. He took the plate, but dropped it. Suddenly, Pam appeared out of nowhere and asked him to leave because it was not cool to invite your own father to your birthday. Pam got very emotional and told me about her family drama. Her father had recently gotten divorced from her mother because she was obsessed with alcohol and young fitness trainers. Alex began to fool around and meet with random girls, which pissed Pam off. She thanked me for being such a good friend and hugged me, saying that I was like a sister to her. On the way home, Ken was very excited. Pam promised to sign him up for an internship at her father's development company. And that's when he began working for Alex. We began to meet less often, but he began to meet Pam more often, behind my back. How did I find out? One day he came over to the coffee shop in the middle of my shift and just broke up with me because Pam asked him to. Their secret affair had been going on for a month or so. I couldn't believe my ears. I mean, of course, I always knew that Pam was mean, but I would never have thought that she would turn her meanness against me. She called me a sister. I told Ken to stay away from me and the coffee shop for the rest of his life. Later that night, I went to Pam's house and asked her to explain herself. I found her by the pool. She just told me that I was overreacting and asked if I wanted to swim and chill. I turned around and ran away because I didn't want to show her my tears. On the way, I ran into Alex. He took a tissue out of his pocket and asked me what was wrong. But I just said, "Ask your daughter," pushed him away and left. This is how I lost my boyfriend and my so-called sister. But the worst was yet to come. That next week, my father received a letter from his landlord. The coffee shop building was about to be sold and knocked down in 3 months. The land buyer had decided to build a new shopping mall in that area. And guess who the buyer was? Of course, it was Alex. I wouldn't be surprised if Ken floated that idea to him. My father was crushed. He had dedicated 20 years of his life to that place. On that same day, I drove to the local Architectural Heritage Prosecution Authorities to file my complaint. But the new construction project had already been approved because the building wasn't precious enough to be saved, in their opinion. I yelled at everybody in the room. I told them that I would go to the White House to solve this issue, if I had to. But deep inside, I felt desperate. I told my father to have a party at the coffee shop and collect signatures against the demolition of the building. We called everyone. Friends came over with posters and asked the people passing by to have a free cup of coffee and sign the petition. Unfortunately, there were not many visitors and even fewer signatures. Suddenly, I noticed Alex. He ordered espresso and left me a huge tip. Alex told us that he had a plan B for us, since our coffee shop had so many loyal customers. I asked whether he was still going to destroy the building, And he said yes. My father yelled at him, saying, "Then I don't want to hear anything about it," and left. Alex gave me his business card and winked at me. He said, "Call me if you're smarter than your father." I thought that evening couldn't get any worse. But then I noticed Pam and Ken in line for a free coffee. She said hi as if she had never stolen my boyfriend. Ken was running around with cups like an obedient puppy. As for me, well, I just pretended that I'd moved on and allowed them to leave alive. Later that night, there were only a few people left on the terrace. I was cleaning the tables inside the coffee shop and crying. My father had a strange, eccentric friend named Nancy. In her 60s, she was still frivolous. Nancy asked me what was wrong. I told her everything about Pam. Nancy shrugged and said, "Honey, if I were you, I wouldn't even worry about your skinny ex-jerk. I would go get that gorgeous Alex and become his third wife before it's too late. But that's just my opinion." Of course, Nancy was the worst relationship expert that you could possibly meet. However, she did float an idea to me. If Alex falls desperately in love with me, then there is a small chance that he could save the coffee shop. He was kind of flirting with me already, so I decided to play along. The next day I called him and he asked me out to dinner. A business dinner, of course. I put on my best dress and makeup. I felt a pleasant sensation from the fact that I was going to flirt with Ken's boss and Pam's father. Alex took me to a nice restaurant. He suggested a monetary compensation and that we moved the coffee shop to another location on the property that was recently purchased by his company. He promised a long-term rental and preferential terms. Moreover, he was ready to become an investor for our coffee shop. I realized that he wasn't that bad after all. I mean, he was very intelligent and calm, obviously much smarter than my father or anybody I'd ever met before, and his cologne smelled really nice. So I agreed to think about his offer. And then the conversation became more personal. He asked me about Pam and Ken. I told him the truth, and he apologized for his daughter's behavior. After dinner, we drove to his favorite part of the city to walk around the historical buildings. Part of me was very confused, but another part was curious and excited. At some point, he took my hand and told me that I was very beautiful. He then apologized for dropping my cake. I gave up and kissed him, and it was so good. After that strange business date, Alex and I began to meet on a regular basis. Secretly, of course. We met in hotels, restaurants that offered privacy, and went for walks in nature. My father had no idea, and I felt like a traitor. But I couldn't help myself. Alex had opened a whole new world for me. I mean, of course, my initial plan was to fool Alex, but instead, I fell in love with him, and he was serious about me too. My father still refused to accept the rescue plan for the coffee shop and was just going to close it, basically because of his stubbornness. 2 months later, I was spending time with Alex at a chic hotel. In the morning, we went down and saw Pam in the lobby. She had been looking for Alex everywhere because he didn't answer her calls, while her mum had run away from her rehab. Pam knew that sometimes Alex brought his girlfriends to that hotel, but she didn't expect to see me in that role at all. She screamed and called me a few very bad words that day, but Alex protected me and put her in a taxi. Later that night, Pam came over to the coffee shop and asked my father directly in front of all his customers whether he knew that his precious daughter was having a relationship with Alex. Although I felt very humiliated, I didn't deny anything. My father was shocked. He refused to speak to me for several days. I called Alex and we had a meeting in his office. I offered to stop our shameful affair, but he asked me to get myself together and take care of my father's business since he was so conservative. He called Ken and told him to help me prepare a reconstruction and design plan for the new location. The next week, I took my dad to the new location for the new coffee shop and showed him the sketches. He seemed inspired and finally gave up. He signed the papers and used Alex's step-aside fee to pay for the rent, reconstruction, and decoration of the new space. I enjoyed the process so much. Later that month, I witnessed the demolition of the building with my own 2 eyes. I cried, but at the same time, I felt relieved. 4 years later, my father retired and I'm still in charge at our successful family coffee shop. Also, I finished my studies and helped Alex to open a new high-class restaurant. It's hard to admit, but Nancy was right. We're engaged and love each other madly. As for Pam, she still hates me, but thank God we're living separately. She moved in together with Ken after Alex and I made our relationship official. Sometimes I still receive text messages from Ken about how sorry he is for breaking up with me, but I just ignore them.